Hey guys, welcome back to another SwiftUI programming tutorial. In today's tutorial, we're going to be going over how to create a user authentication service within a SwiftUI application so that if you're inventing the next Instagram or Facebook, you can finally have a way to store your users. So without further ado, let's begin. Okay, so over here in Xcode, the first thing we want to click on is create a new Xcode project. Stick with app, and then we'll just name ours user authentication. We want SwiftUI and language to be Swift. You can just hit create, and that should take a second. But then once we're done with this, we want to instantly click X. You'll find out later, and we want to go into our terminal. And by the way, that doesn't have to be like instantly. It's not gonna like break if you don't do it the second it loads, so don't worry about that. So I'm gonna CD to my desktop and into my Xcode, but wherever you have this stored, you just want to go there. Let me make this a little bit bigger too. Okay, so we're going to do into user authentication, and then we want to do pod init. So if you don't have pod, I'll quickly pop up some instructions on how to download it. But yeah, so once we do that, we should have this pod file, and we can vim into our pod file. And we're going to want to add a few pods. So the first one we'll do is pod Firebase /auth. Next one, Firebase /Firestore. And finally, Firebase Firestore Swift. Good, and then we can just do pod install. Cool, so now that that is done, we can X out of our terminal, and let's actually go over into wherever we save this file, and you can see that we now have this xcworkspace file. This is the one we're going to want to open. In the past, we were opening this Xcode project, but when we open this new one, that's actually going to load our pods for us. So we can just open that, and you can see we have the pods. So this app is going to use an MVVM model for kind of like the data storage. If you're not familiar with that, there's some good posts about it on hackingwithswift.com. But basically, we divide our project into model, view, ViewModel. So the model is our data representation. ViewModel is it's where our views are subscribing to actually get the data. And then we obviously have our views, which is displaying the data. So we can come up in here, and let's just do file, new group. We'll name this view, and then we can also do file, new group, model, our data model, and file, new group, view model. Let me move this up here to the root. Okay, so in the next part of this video, I'm going to be going over the Firebase configuration and setup. If you guys don't know what Firebase is, it's basically a Google service which allows you to use a database and also their authentication services. So it's really good for a small-scale project like ours. We want to go over to Firebase, and we can just click Add Project. I'll just name ours User Authentication Demo. And we can just hit continue. Enable Google Analytics, that's fine. Default account. It's going to take a quick second. Okay, and now we're ready. Continue. All right, then we're going to click on iOS, and we need our app bundle ID, which is pretty straightforward to get. So you can see if we go over here into our application, user authentication, and then this right here is our bundle identifier. So we can copy and paste that here. We don't need an app nickname or an app store ID. We can just click register app. Okay, this next step is very important. We're going to download this Google service-info.plist, and we are going to click and drag that into our application. And just click finish. Sweet. Now we're good. Click next. Okay, we've already added these SDKs, so we can just click next, Okay, so we actually want to copy and paste this boilerplate right here. So if we go over here into our user authentication app and then just paste this in here, we want to delete this at right there. And then we also want to change this to UI application.launch key options instead. And then let's just move these imports up to the top. All right, we're going to want to change a few more things. We're going to add up here UI application delegate adapter, and we'll just do app delegate dot self and then var app delegate. And then we also we don't need this window, and we want to change this to an NS object. UI application delegate is good. And everything else looks to be fine. Yeah, I think we're good. So if we just click build, I'm going to try it with an iPhone 12. And let's make sure this successfully builds. Okay, so now that our app has successfully loaded, we know that everything is working great. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up our user model. So let's go over here into the model folder and do new file, Swift file, and we'll just name this user. Okay, and then we can say struct user conforms to codable var first name. We'll just set that to a string. Var last name, set that to a string as well, and var sign update. We'll just set that to date.now as default. So this is what our basic user model looks like, and this is how it will be stored in our Firebase database. Okay, so now let's do the actual view model for the user. This is probably the most complex part of the actual programming, but yeah, let's get it done with. Okay, so inside of view model, just say new file, Swift files good again, and this time we'll name this user view model. I know, very original. Okay, so we want to import a few things. We'll first import Firebase auth, import Firebase Firestore, and import Firebase Firestore Swift. Don't forget that last one. That last one gave me a lot of debugging time. Okay, so class user view model, we want this to conform to observable object, and we'll have one published property, published var user, and we'll just set this to a user optional. So if our user is logged in and authenticated, this user will actually have some data stored with it. Otherwise, it'll just be set to nil. Okay, so now let's have a few properties. We're going to say private let auth equals auth.auth, private let db equals firestore.firestore, and a few computed properties. So in SwiftUI, computed properties are they're kind of like variables or a get method, but they compute when you call on them. So auth.currentUser, this is going to be an optional, and we'll just ask for the user ID. Next, we want to add another property, var user. User is authenticated. This is going to be a bool, and we'll just say, does the auth.current user not equal nil? So if it doesn't equal nil, then the user is authenticated. And then finally, var user is authenticated and synced. And this will also be a bool. This time we'll check if the user is not equal to nil and the user is authenticated. So in our case, our user view model depends on two things. It depends if it's synced and if it's authenticated. And synced corresponds to have we pulled data from the database, and authenticated is completely different from if we've actually fetched the user's data from the database. Okay, so now we're going to add our Firebase auth functions. So the first one's going to be func sign in. And we're going to have email, string, password, string. Okay, so we do auth.signin, and we want to do with email password. So we'll pass in the email, the password, and then we will just pass a closure onto the end of this for our completion. So we want to reference self weekly, so we do not create a memory cycle, and then we'll have result error in. And we're going to check that the result is not equal to nil. The error is equal to nil. Otherwise, we're just going to return. And then we want to do dispatch queue.main.async, and we'll just do self.sync. And that self.sync once more is going to pull our user data from the database. Okay, our next function, sign up. This time we are going to take an email, which is a string, first name, which is a string, and last name, another string, and password, I know, very repetitive, a string. Okay, now we'll do auth.create user with email password. So this time we'll do email, we'll do password, and once again we'll get rid of this completion argument and we'll just pass a closure. Once more, do weak self and result error in. We can just copy this check right here, and then we want to do dispatch queue.main.async, and we'll do self.add. We're going to create a user in here. So this is going to add our user to the database. So we will create our user, first name, last name, and just pass in those properties as so. And then we'll also do self.sync. So we'll add the user to the database and then we will sync it. Okay, last function, func sign out. And this one is pretty self-explanatory. We'll just say try auth.signout, and we'll set the user equal to nil. And on the catch, if we have an error, we'll just say print error signing out user, and then we can just insert our error like so. Okay, so we're getting some complaints up here about not having functions for add and sync, but we are about to add those. Okay, so let's just say Firestore functions for user data. Okay, so the first function we're going to have is private func sync, and this is going to pull our data from the database. So we'll guard that the user is authenticated. Otherwise, we will return. And then we will just want to do db.collection of users .document self.user_id, and because the user is authenticated, we know that this property is available. .get document, and we'll pass a closure. We'll say document error in, and then we can just say guard that the document does not equal nil, the error equals nil, else we can return, and then we can do try self.user equals document.data as user.self. So we're essentially assigning the user property to whatever data we got from our database poll, and we can catch an error and just say print sync error and whatever error we received. Awesome. Next function, we'll do our add function. So we'll say private func add. This time we're actually going to take a user. So let's just do user like so. And we can first guard that the user is authenticated. Otherwise, we want to return. And then do let underscore equals try db.collection of users again dot document self.userid set data from user. So essentially we're setting whatever document we have designated by the user ID to our user's data. And Firestore is pretty smart and it can do all the formatting for us. Okay, otherwise we'll print error adding and just insert our error. And our last function, private func update. As you'll soon notice, it's very similar to our add function, but with a few slight differences. The first one is it does not take any parameters, and also we're going to guard if the user is authenticated and synced. So we can only update if we pulled from the database first. Okay, and if not, we can return like always. And another do catch statement, say let underscore equals try db.collection. Actually, just copy and paste this line right here. It's going to be the exact same. And on our catch, we'll just print error updating error. Okay, so now that we are done with this, it looks like we have no errors. So I think we are good. And now let's move on to some of our views. And that should wrap up the tutorial for us once we're done with our views. So the first view we're going to do is we're going to do our content view. And we want to have our environment object, which if you haven't done already, make sure you do let user equals user ViewModel. So we initialize it inside of our user authentication app, and then set the property right here, environment object of user. So inside of our content view, we can do environment object var user, type user ViewModel, and then var body some view. And we're going to have a navigation view wrapping our application. If the user is authenticated and synced, we want to display a profile view. Otherwise, we want to display an authentication view, which we will add right now. So the first one, file, new, we want a SwiftUI view, and we will just name this profile view. You can go ahead and delete the preview, and let's have our environment object var user ViewModel. Okay, so we're gonna have a VStack, and we want to just have some text. We'll say successfully authenticated, and then let's just do our user dot user. Remember, this is an optional first name, and if this property is not present, we'll just replace it with a empty string like that. And then let's do our user dot user last name, which if we don't have, we'll once again replace with empty quotes like that. Okay, and then let's add a button with an action to our sign out. Sorry, we'll do user dot sign out, and let's just have the text saying sign out. Okay, so now we have the ability to sign out. And then let's add our authentication view. So we can do file new once again, SwiftUI view, and our authentication view. Once again, delete the preview. Okay, so this one's a little bit more involved. We're going to have a VStack, and we're going to have first a sign in view, And then we're going to have a navigation link. Some text will say sign up. And then our destination will be a sign up view. This should all look very good in just a second. So we're going to have struct sign in view, another view, and we can just do environment object var user ViewModel, and we want some state properties too. State private var email. We'll just set this equal to an empty string, and password. Set that equal to an empty string as well. And then we'll have a body, and we want a text field so that we can enter our email. Sorry, let's actually wrap this in a VStack. I almost forgot to do that. So an email text field, and then we pass into our text property a binding to the email variable. And let's also add a few properties. We'll just say auto capitalization we'll set to none, and disable auto correction we'll set to true. Next, we want a field for our password. So we're actually going to do here a secure field. Type in password, and then obviously a binding to our password. And then we want to keep these two properties. Finally, we'll have a button with an action set to user.sign-in email password, and as you would expect, pass in our email and our password. And then we'll just have some text saying sign in. Pretty straightforward. Okay, and our last view, I believe, the sign up view. Okay, and then we can see the brilliance of what we have. Okay, sign up view. Let's copy all this jazz. Sweet. Okay, and we want to add two other ones. We'll just say first name, last name, and can copy those. And we're going to add two text fields, so this one will be our first name. We can delete the auto capitalization. That would be useful in this case. So first name, and we'll do last name. And then finally the action, let's have, sign up, and the action will be user.signup, and just pass all these things in like so. Alright, and if everything is good, I think we should be ready to build our application. I do not see any errors, but we should figure it out on, okay, cannot find, okay, yeah, we should be able to figure them out on our application build. But I will see you guys in a second. Okay, so now that it is finally built, let's give it a quick test run. Okay, so the first thing we'd want to do is we'd want to hit sign up. Okay, we can enter our first name. I'll just say Mark. Last name. The email, doesn't really matter, mark@email.com. And the password, we'll just do Mark. Sign up. And awesome, successfully authenticated Mark Ray. And then if we come over into our Firebase console, you can see after a quick refresh, here we go, mark@email.com. And in our Firestore database, you can see Mark Ray, sign up date, perfect. Alrighty, and yeah, you guys can do multiple users with this. So if I click sign out and then I do sign up, let's just say DeMarcus Cousins, we'll just say DeMarcus@email.com, and password we'll just do DeMarcus. successfully authenticated DeMarcus Cousins. So perfect. And then sign in. Let's just do mark@email.com. Mark successfully authenticated Mark Cray. So as you guys can see, you can obviously add more style to this, add more features, but now you have a complete user authentication service with the ability to store user data. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you liked it, leave a like and subscribe if you want to. I'll be releasing more SwiftUI content in the near future. I'm thinking about building a search bar so that you can search users in an Instagram-like fashion. But those are just some of the videos I have coming out in the future. So make sure you guys stay tuned.